Hello, friends. This is Ayasoma. Welcome to another sutta study. So today we will be talking about the Kamma-nirodha Sutta, so Samyutta Nikaya 35.146. So here is, I'm going to highlight the sutta right now on the screen, and um, we're going to actually address sort of part of the sutta rather than the whole thing. And we will be talking a little bit on how to deal with what we perceive as the results of past karma. And then, with the natural kind of questions that can arise in the mind, such as, why is this happening to me? What is this? I don't like this. I don't want this. I wish there could be in a different way. Or perhaps also the opposite, right? Whenever we also are having good experiences that are like, oh yes, I must have done something good in the past, and this is a really good thing right here, right now. So this sutta has a very beautiful, succinct way of presenting the teachings. But before we begin by reading the sutta, we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham namam sangham namasami. All right, so the sutta begins. Mendicants, I will teach you old action, new action, the cessation of action, and the practice that leads to the cessation of action. Listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. And what is old action? The I is old action. It should be seen as produced by choices and intentions as something to be felt. The ear, nose, tongue, body, the mind is old action. It should be seen as produced by choices and intentions as something to be felt. This is called old action. And what is new action? The deeds you currently perform by way of body, speech, and mind. This is called new action. And what is the cessation of action? When you experience freedom due to the cessation of deeds by body, speech, and mind. This is called the cessation of action. And what's the practice that leads to the cessation of action? It is simply this noble eightfold path that is right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right immersion. This is called the practice that leads to the cessation of action. So I've taught you old action, new action, the cessation of action, and the practice that leads to the cessation of action. Out of compassion, I've done what a teacher should do who wants what's best for their disciples. Here are these roots of trees, and here are these empty huts. Practice absorption, mendicants. Don't be negligent. Don't regret it later. This is my instruction to you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Very beautiful, beautiful sutta that I've been contemplating quite a lot lately. So I wanted to share it with you. And in particular, once again, as we mentioned at the beginning of this morning together, precisely the part where the first part where the Buddha is talking about old action. And so he talks about it. He defines it first and foremost as the five senses plus the mind, right? So that is old action, he says. That is old karma, right? Past karma. And how should we see it? The Buddha gives us a very practical, very simple instruction. It should be seen as produced by choices and intentions as something to be felt. So, of course, what is translated here by Bhante Sujata's choices is abhisankata, and intentions is abhisanchetayita. So sankata, something constructive, right? So something that is produced by choices, by it's difficult to actually render these words in English perfectly, but we see by choices and intentions, obviously the choice, the whether it's a correct choice, whether it's a proper choice, whether it's a beneficial choice with the intention of it being beneficial, right? Or whether it's a non-beneficial choice, right? That creates a result, that creates an experience, that creates something that is then will have a result, repercussion. So these days in common parlance, actually, we use karma, the word karma, more as a synonym actually of vipaka, which is actually the result of karma. It's the result of an intentional action. So we say it's their karma to be experiencing that, or it's my karma, or it's their karma. Well, actually, to be quite precise, we should be saying it's that vipaka. It's my vipaka, it's their vipaka, or whomever's vipaka, right? Because karma is something actually that we are doing. And so, yes, when we are experiencing something through the six senses, it is the result of past choices and intentions, past karma, right? That is creating this current result. And the Buddha once again gives us very practical instruction to feel it, to experience it, which is something, it's a very subtle actually direction, very subtle teaching. And we can kind of have a glimpse on what this actual teaching is when we see the cultures, Asian cultures in particular. What comes to mind is actually, for example, the Tibetans, right? Many people have done many studies on actually the Tibetan people, both the monastics and also the common people, the lay people, when all the sort of through the tragedy, right, that happened with the occupation of Tibet, and the exile that happened, and the torture, that, and all the difficulties, right, that the people have gone through, whether it was lay people or monastics. They've been tortured. They've been they've been seeing a lot of suffering of their dear ones, and they've experienced a lot of suffering themselves. And when they did actually the studies of the sort of mental health, the mental well-being of all of these different people, the scientists were actually quite impressed to see how healthy, how sane, how even though they had been through so much, what we would say really atrocious experiences, their minds were overall, obviously the monastics were actually quite incredible, full of loving kindness, full of brahmaviharas, all these lamas, really amazing beings that have cultivated their minds so well to the point of actually even loving their torturers, right? Loving the people that were, cutting their skin, during really actually embodying the simile of the soul, right? Really practicing in accordance with the Dhamma to its literal teachings. But also the common folk, right? The ones that hadn't dedicated their entire life to the Dhamma in the monastic form, but were householders, they had children and so forth. They saw that actually their level of suffering was considerably lower than any other non-Buddhist people who had been through similar circumstances. And so the scientists were actually like very impressed, very curious about how is this possible that there is none of this PTSD or none of this like really atrocious things that are completely normal, by the way, right? Completely natural responses of the mind. And what they saw was by interviewing all these folks, they saw that the way that they were talking about their experience was with the understanding that something had happened, they had done something in the past, and that this was the result. So usually in the West, when we hear this kind of wording, we're like, wow, that's crazy, that's a victim blaming, that's horrible, that's terrible, that's absolutely not beneficial. It's not to say that actually that type of sometimes those kind of ways of talking about it can be actually very harmful. So we shouldn't be the ones going to people and telling them, oh, it's your past karma and whatever, just deal with it. But rather, it should be something internal, something personal, something that we should explore for ourselves. We should open up and go not with a kind of guilty sort of finger pointing, oh, you've been a bad person in the past, ayasoma, like all these horrible things are happening to you, but rather with the understanding, with the maturity of fully understanding causality, so that there's nothing random in the universe, but rather there's always a cause. There's always causes and conditions that create a result. No different than when we look at the weather, right? If there's a storm, right? There's causes and conditions that create that storm. There's lots of different scenarios, right? Whenever you put those conditions in place, there's a natural result. So when we understand karma and rebirth, the full cycles, and that we've been here without discoverable beginning, roaming and wandering through samsara, blinded by ignorance, blinded by greed, hatred, and delusion, then obviously, naturally, it comes that we have done both good deeds and bad deeds, right? Which naturally will bring good results and bad results, right? And so in Buddhist cultures, usually there's a deep understanding of that. And so what the scientists that I was telling you about earlier in the Tibetan sort of studies, what they noticed is that that deep understanding of karma for the Tibetan people didn't make them feel sorry for themselves, but rather made them approach their current situation as, okay, this is something that is being exhausted right here, right? The result of past deeds that have been done the result is coming to fruition, and now it's exhausted. And so without the clinging, without the appropriation, without going like, oh, this is mine, this is something that I've done, but rather it's the consequences of past actions. And that these don't define me right now. I can actually decide to make good deeds right now. That's all that there is in my power. Then obviously what they noticed was that there was obviously still pain. It's difficult. There's physical pain. There is the perhaps the hurt of the it's like an unpleasant situation, but there's not the extra beating up, the extra suffering of thinking that something randomly happened, and either a divine being hates us, or there's kind of mysterious circumstance that is creating this predicament. And so this is really beautiful, actually. I've met many folks that are born in Buddhist cultures that have this actually attitude towards past karma, and so that they beautifully actually practice the teachings of the Buddha just as this teaching shows us, as something to be felt. And it's also something that I found in surprise in Italy, actually, amongst certain Catholic householders. This has been quite the surprise for me, because I was born and bred in Italy, and even though I was baptized and everything, I didn't really have much of a Catholic upbringing, and I'm kind of learning Catholicism now through just meeting so many folks, just because of this form as a monastic that, especially when we were Tudong, we were welcomed, by so many different people, and we start having conversations. And amongst the folks that love giving alms to Buddhist monastics, we have many Catholics. So at a certain point, I met this woman a really incredible Catholic devout woman. And she had been, she's now in her 70s, mid 70s, and she's been taking care of her mom, who's still alive, who's almost 100 years old. And she's been taking care of her as her only sole caregiver since she was 50, so like for 25 years or so. So she gave up, you can say, she sacrificed a big chunk of her life, like a third of her life, just to her mom. So she was married and she, had children and everything. And the husband and the children perhaps would go on different trips for different days and so forth. But since her mother was wheelchair bound, she could not, and she had also all sorts of different problems. She couldn't leave the house, so this woman really sacrificed her well-being, her not well-being, her how do you say, her desire also to be with her family, right? All the leisure, not going to trips. Like, she did a lot of things that normally we would go like, wow, you're really giving up so much, right? So while her family was quote unquote having a good time, she was quote unquote not having a good time. At least externally. And so I was telling her, wow, this is really, I was asking her, how did you manage to cope with all of this? It's definitely difficult. Her mom also has mental disorders, mental issues. So it's not that her mom was grateful. It's not that her mom was always kind and peaceful, but quite the opposite, right? So it was a little bit of a distress for her. Anyone could imagine. And she said actually these beautiful words. She said, "This is my cross to bear," which is a phrase that I had always heard since I was a little child, but I never quite understood. I thought it was a little bit kind of crazy and a little bit ridiculous. But this time around, through the framework of the Buddhist teachings, it kind of became apparent how it has a bit a sort of same kind of result through different wordings and obviously through a different view. And I'm not trying to say that Catholicism is the same thing as Buddhism or Jesus and the Buddha taught the same thing, quite the opposite. But rather, in bringing this up as a reflection, I'm just sharing the reflection that came up in my mind when I kind of fully understood this teaching. It's my cross to bear, and her perspective towards the situation was, this is a difficult situation. There is definitely, it's painful, it's not pleasant. It's a painful feeling, not a pleasant feeling. But I understand that thanks to my faith, this is also what she said, that it was her faith that has been giving her still to this day the strength to take care of her mom, the strength to renounce so many things. So without asking questions, without questioning, why me, why this, why is this happening, if only I could, etc., relinquishing the appropriation towards this dukkha, but rather imitating the image of Christ, right? How he carried the cross, right? And felt the cross. In the same way, she's carrying, this is her cross to bear in this life. And so it's something to be felt, to be experienced. Very, very profound, very beautiful, actually, practice. And so interesting it has been for me to see the entry point to something so profound, also from a different wording, also from, once again, Catholicism. And what I really take from this teaching is that when we understand, whatever wording we want to use it, whether it's past karma, something to be felt, something that it's caused by intentions and choices in the past, or whether we actually enter through faith. We can also take, just a sort of more Catholic, perhaps, example. We just have faith that this is it's just like this, you know, it's just, this is the situation. I'm going to try my best to endure it, which doesn't mean like, but rather it just means like, oh, okay, I'm feeling it. I'm understanding that it's painful. I don't have to pretend that it's not painful, but I can stop beating myself in regards to the situation. And I can understand that once again, it's just the way it is. So we start creating a new type of inclination of the mind, new bending of the mind, which is to stop appropriating whatever is happening, right? To stop thinking that is somehow something that we own, something that defines us, something that, yeah, all of this body mind experience is me, mine, right? It's Ayasoma. And so by depersonalizing, it's not that we become not sensible anymore to the situation. It's not that we pretend that it's not there and we're like, oh yes, I am, you know, completely enlightened. Yeah, everything is great, whether something is you know, painful or it's pleasurable, same thing, right? That's not, the indifference is not what we're trying to aim at, but rather what we're trying to understand is what we're trying to aim at is that equanimity, is that fully understanding of the way things are, and loosening up that tendency towards grasping towards it, right? And just letting it do its course. And at the same time, realizing that we cannot control the consequences, right? No matter how much we hate these conditions, or also the flip side, if we really love the conditions, no matter how much we love the conditions, we can't change their nature, right? If it's something that we love a lot, it will have the nature to change and swift away. And actually, also, if we don't dislike it, also it will have the nature to change. So that is actually quite good. Good news. But also we have to wait for it to take its natural course. We can't really alter it. We can't actually make it disappear right there. And so all we can do is, in this moment, distinguish, you know, whenever we plant good seeds, we get good results. And whenever we plant bad seeds, we get bad results. So then we can start refining more and more of our conduct, right? We can't control the consequences, but we can control the causes. So we put new causes. And at the same time, by looking at this process of causality, right? And we touch a little bit on the rest of the sutta briefly. We stop appropriating the vipaka, but we also stop appropriating the kamma. So we stop appropriating, thinking this is me, this is mine, this is who I am. Both I am the doer and both I am the, you know, I can control like perfectly 100% what I'm doing and 100% the results, right? But we actually understand this process of causality that is somewhat impersonal, that is somewhat something that, you know, has its own law, has its own natural way of doing. And the more we become, we depersonalize, we see the anatta aspect, the anatta characteristic of everything, the more we get closer to the cessation of karma. And because the cessation of karma, this intentional action, right, creates all these results because it's rooted in ignorance. It's rooted in the ignorance of actually thinking, craving, you know, wanting to have a pleasant experience and not wanting to have an unpleasant experience, right? So even when we're doing good, and this is obviously a big refinement, right? When we do good, and we understand that good brings good results, which we should actually, we're very much encouraged by the Buddha, by the way, to do that, to keep doing good and to get and reap good results. That is actually something to be done. But further on, when we are actually at the end of the path, right? We need to a little bit start, not at the end. I mean, we start doing it right now, but at the end, then we'll clearly see that having that tendency of also wanting a really pleasant experience, even the most refined experience, even the most heavenly experience, it's still a cause of suffering. It's still dukkha. It's still unsatisfying, right? It's still impermanent. And so what we want to do is actually really let go of everything. But that we can think about when we get there, right? So these are a few reflections for this morning. So maybe we can see if there are some comments. So hello to Matthias, Sud, Yankee Apple, Rebecca, Nico, Malika, Stevie, Andrew, Jim, Maria, Isabel, Manal, good to see you. And Sud says, are you able to share a link to the sutta being discussed? Yes, it's this one right here. Samyutta Nikaya 35.146. Okay. And Kit says, whoops. Being responsible for your own karma can be as scary as it is empowering. You have to take on a lot of responsibility, and yet doing so is so freeing. Yes, here we can actually, thank you, Kit, for sharing this. We can really see how counterintuitive the Dhamma is, right? That's why it's so difficult to become a Sammasambuddha when there is no Dhamma, no teachings of the Buddha around, and you actually have to figure it out. Because we can see from the perspective of us, even though we have the teachings of the Buddha, we're still like, okay, this is like really weird, and I'm not quite sure. It's just counterintuitive. So there has to be a little bit of faith that pushes us towards to actually even take these teachings as a working hypothesis. And then when we take them as a working hypothesis, when we actually practice in accordance with Dhamma, then we can see for ourselves, right? Ehipassiko is my favorite quality of the Dhamma, one that brings me so much faith since the very beginning of my path, right? The Dhamma invites us to come and see for ourselves. And so we're like, okay, this doesn't seem quite right. Then we try it, we're like, actually, it's all right, you know. There's some release here. And then we can keep practicing in accordance with it. But once again, these teachings on kamma and taking responsibility on kamma, I would really recommend for it to be a personal practice and not a practice that we do unto others. We have also other passages in the suttas that where the Buddha really discourages, you know, there's some householders that go like, oh, that person, you know, is going to that destination, etc., because they did this, and that. And the Buddha is like, no, what are you saying? It's full of delusion. Only one like me can actually understand really fully the workings of karma. So when we start applying these teachings or these ideas to others, what we think, you know, it's the product of their karma, and what is the, you know, what is the vipaka, etc., it can lead to a lot of delusion. But if we take these teachings to ourselves and actually reflect on the causality, then it can actually be very, very, very useful, as we mentioned. And Andrew says, thank you. Thank you. And what advice would you give to people who are currently suffering but who don't believe in karma? Well, I mean, following the teachings of the Buddha is is the antidote. So whatever we believe in doesn't really matter, but whatever we practice, that's what matters. So if we don't believe in karma, which is like really fair enough, it's okay. We don't need to believe in karma. What we need to do is actually not shut down the possibility that karma exists, that karma is actually something, a natural law that governs our experience. So what we should do is investigate, right, our experience through the teachings of the Buddha. So I would say we could take karma as a working hypothesis rather than going, I believe in this or I don't believe in this. Because even if we believe in this, but we're actually not really investigating the teachings, it's a little bit silly. It won't actually bring us further into the path, right? Maybe, maybe useful to a certain degree, but just believing in an intellectual way, just because we like it, just because it makes sense or whatever, doesn't really, it's useful up to a certain extent. But actually contemplating, looking at our heart, looking at our mind, really seeing intentional action, what kind of result it has and how it shapes our reality, that is something that we can do both in formal meditation and in our daily life. Really seeing, taking it as once again, as a working hypothesis. Also taking the precepts. What happens when we take the precepts and we start restraining our actions? When we stop killing all sentient beings, not only humans, but also insects, right? That is karma. What kind of vipaka do we have? That is actually an instant vipaka that starts shaping our mental world radically differently. And also the rest of our world also starts shifting magically. So then we're like, said magically right now, but is it actually magic? Or is it something that is, is very scientific actually? So that's what I would encourage to do. And Kate says, at certain times I would have wanted to reject this teaching, but as I've healed some and learned there is power in accepting reality and feeling interconnectivity. Thank you for sharing. Nico says, profound analogy of cross to bear in Western framework, not about I suffer. Thank you for saying this has to be felt. Oh, we can thank the Buddha. The Buddha is so eloquent. Like, it's just so beautiful how short this sutta is and how profound it is. Really, really liberating. And I have to say, very difficult actually for me to understand Christianity. But when I do, I'm like, oh, this is really beautiful, something that we can learn from our fellow spiritual practitioners. And Matthias says, from the aspect of karma, I find useful to reflect my inner resources and strength. That sometimes I want to proceed in some way in life and finding that I can't at this point, accepting that. Yes, that is so beautiful, Matthias. Yes, that's also understanding the anatta also of our choices, right? Also of our ability to make certain choices, right? If actually this all depended on 100%, if it was all us, then in this moment, then Ayasoma could decide, I'm free from greed, hatred, and delusion, just like here, like this, right here, right now. But it doesn't really work that way. So we understand that also our current choices are determined, are influenced by the past choices that we made in the past. So all we can do is shift, shift a little bit. Keep planting, keep doing, keep working. If the soil is arid, the soil is sterile, like we need to actually fertilize it first, right? So whether we want it to grow a big, giant garden in it, or whether we don't, if the soil doesn't have that conditions, it just won't have, it's not ready to have that garden on it. But what we can do is keep working on creating the conditions for then the big garden and then the big harvest to happen later. Jim says, I hope this is appropriate for this topic. I see people often debating the existence of objective good and bad. It tends to go nowhere. Did the Buddha teach on this? I would say that in the Buddhist perspective, it's actually like very simple. The good and bad is what leads to suffering is bad. What doesn't lead to suffering is good, right? So even in a worldly sense, anything, pleasant sort of situation, like not having a really terrible physical disease, or not having extreme poverty, not having a lot of dire situations, it's actually pretty comfortable. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty pleasant. So if we don't want that, then we can actually do basically the opposite of the teachings of the Buddha. And then we can have all sorts of terrible illnesses, right? There's all sorts of hells in Buddhism. So if we really want to have a bad experience, we can have an experience full of suffering, then yes, we can do the opposite of what the Buddha taught. And if we don't want that, we can do what the Buddha taught, right? So that it's not really a matter of objective good or bad, but rather we're like, okay, this leads to suffering, this doesn't lead to suffering. And Vanessa says, how can we practice the balance of understanding our past karma while also not letting it overtake us, keep us in an unwholesome situation? Example, not victim blaming, not continue to suffer just because. Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa, for this question. Once again, we can go back to this sutta. It's something that needs to be felt. It's not something that needs to be like, obsessed about. It's not something that we need to beat ourselves about, but rather we just go, okay, this is the product of past actions. Whatever has been done has been done. There is nothing, that I can do about the situation. It just is. It's kind of like when the winter comes. The winter just is. We can't turn it into summer, right? So if we beat ourselves about it, we're like, oh, it's all my fault that the winter has arrived, and like I should have done this or I should have done that, then of course we will suffer. If we just accept it for being the consequences of the past, and also we can think of it of not even being ourselves, like for example, if there's lots of crazy things that can happen to us that we have no idea, right? We can think of our previous self, which is not really us, some other person had another name, had another background, had another nationality, probably had another sentient being. So we can have compassion for that ignorant fool of the past that has given us that inheritance that we're having and we're experiencing right now. So sometimes we can also use skillful means in our mind, whatever works, to detach the mind from thinking, from grasping, from appropriating, once again, what doesn't belong to us. This is just a suitcase, right? So it's a suitcase, and that's what it is. We received the suitcase, and now we can just leave it there, and we deal with it. But there's no point in. We don't really know also how the workings of karma, right, work in the specifics. So it's really pointless. The Buddha said that if we start going through that road, our head is going to explode. So all we want to do is understand causality and then go, okay, well, whatever, this person is shouting at me or whatever, then this is just the consequences of me shouting to another person in the past, or something like that, something very, very simple, something very easy. And not what we can do is just try to cultivate the heart so that it's less reactive these days. So we stop creating that kind of karma. And this, of course, is just a simple example. Stevie says, is determinism essential to understanding karma? I would say no, because I actually don't exactly know what determinism is. So I assume that it's not it's not essential to the understanding. Yeah, we don't need to get too specific about studying all the philosophy, especially in Western philosophy. There's so many different ideas and thoughts, but rather I would encourage just to investigate once again the teachings of the Buddha, because they're experiential. It's not just some intellectual knowledge. It's not something that we learn to sound a little bit smarter than our friends. But rather it's something that we learn and then we want to cultivate the heart with. And Adriana says, does the Buddha speak to collective or societal karma in distinction to individual karma action at all in the suttas as well? Not that I'm aware of. No, there's no talking about collective or societal karma, but rather we talk about it in terms of in the suttas it's spoken about as individual karma. So it says, dear Aya, Eightfold Path sounds like very good karma. So basically, in a way, do we need very good karma to end all karma? Yes, I would say that we need very good karma in order to end all the karma. We want the best sort of conditions to actually fully understand the Dhamma and let go also of the good results. Also of appropriating, looking forward to the really incredible, wow, fantastic experiences that samsara can provide, right? Because if we see even how entangled we are with something so trivial, like, I don't know, like pleasant ice cream, just pleasant food. Can you imagine how difficult it is not to get entangled with much more profound states, like the mind itself, without, when it goes into heavenly realms, so like in meditation practice, also when we get to in conditions where there is not even any form, that's some of the most pleasant experience that one can have, right? That's like over the top. So that is the product of good karma, but we need to understand, in order to detach, in order not to appropriate even that, we need to have a good understanding. Good understanding, yeah. Okay, I think that is all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great weekend. And if you're close to Empty Cloud Monastery, that you go and visit the Venerables there. I'm currently in Italy working on still the monastery project here in my home country, which is also why my English is getting worse and worse, because I can't be bilingual. Now I can only speak in Italian. So if you're also in Italy and you want to come and say hello, you can send an email on emptycloud.it. And there's currently a fundraiser going on for the Forest Monastery. We're trying to build acquire a 135 acres forest. It's a really beautiful project. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. And you can find all the information on emptycloud.it. All right. May you be well and happy, and may all good things come to you.